Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today's guest he's on TSN 1050 radio in Toronto. He is also a part-time stand-up hopeful, alumni of Centennial College, and on First Drive Overdrive, Aaron Korolnek. Thank you for being on today's episode, man. Really appreciate it.
It is a pleasure, an honor. I'm very looking forward to the next however many minutes you'll have me. I'm happy to contribute to the program. Thank you for this.
First things first, Jays are on fire right now. They're literally playing like their hair is on fire. I'm pretty sure that Vladdy Guerrero's hair might be on fire during half the times he's at bat. Did you see this explosion from the Blue Jays coming? I think they need to maybe save some of these runs for October. I don't know if Jays fans anywhere expected this. What have been some of the things you've noticed from their recent success and climbing into the wild card spot late in the season?
Well, the thing about the Jays throughout the course of the season was that their run differential alluded to the fact that their record should have been a lot better than it actually was, right? I mean, it just never really made sense that this team was hitting so well, pitching so well, and not winning games to the degree that they should be, simply by virtue of the number of runs they scored versus the runs they allowed. And a lot of that was due to the terrible bullpen. Like early on in the season, it was a complete disaster. They were blowing games in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning with routine. But the bullpen has strengthened, and the bats, at least in the month of September, heading into yesterday, they were hitting .331 as a team, an OPS over 1,000 as a team. Collectively, 1 through 9, they were an MVP candidate, which is simply unprecedented. It was remarkable to see, and night off against Drew Rasmussen last night, but they're back at it today against Michael Wacha and the Rays. So I don't think it was completely unforeseen because we knew with the collection of bats that they have, you mentioned Vladdy, Marcus Semien, Bo Bichette, Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel, all these guys mash. And finally, the pitching, you talk about the acquisition of Jose Barrios at the deadline. Robbie Ray has been an absolute revelation. In my mind, he's got a great chance to win the Cy Young Award, the first time that's happened for a Blue Jay since Roy Halladay. I mean, it's a very significant milestone if he's able to accomplish it. Then you talk about Alek Manoah, who's been a beast in his rookie season for Toronto. So much has gone right for the Jays. Will they be able to close it out? Are they using up too many of their runs in mid-September as opposed to late September? I suppose we'll find out, but there's precedent. I mean, the Colorado Rockies of 2007, they, I believe, won 21 of their last 22, so maybe the Jays can reel off something similar to that.
How far do you think the Jays can take this run into the postseason?
I mean, if they get into the wild card game, I don't see any reason why they couldn't make it to the World Series and maybe not win it. You look at the Dodgers, I mean, that rotation with Scherzer and Buehler and Clayton Kershaw coming back, I mean, it's absolutely nasty. And the Giants, we know how great they've had, how great of a season they've had. Of course, there's a lot of obstacles in the American League, too. I mean, Tampa's not going to roll over. Houston's not going to roll over. But, I mean, when you talk about the lineup on paper, the pitching staff, the bullpen's a big question. But if somehow, some way the bullpen can hold strong for 6 weeks, there's no doubt the Jays are amongst the class in not only the American League, but Major League Baseball as a whole.
I say this only as a person that is not a huge MLB fan. Definitely have picked up more in recent years. It's so strange to me that very few teams can make it to the postseason because with how much parity exists in the playoffs for the MLB, you'd think it would make more sense to have more teams that could enter, because one of my friends and I were sitting down one day and rattling off the number of times every MLB team has made the playoffs. And I think the Yankees have the highest percentage of postseason appearances at around high 390s, like maybe 400. And that's like they've won close to 30 World Series. Do you think that the MLB would benefit from expanding their playoffs? Or do you think that the few teams that don't make it or wouldn't make the cut right now wouldn't make that much of a difference if they were led into the postseason?
MLB did expand their playoffs. There's that wild card game that did not exist until 3 or 4 years ago. So, I mean, they have looked into that and they have adjusted to that. Previously, it was just one wild card and the 3 division winners in both the American League and the National League, right? So the MLB is taking steps to address that issue, but I think baseball does it right, more so than the NHL and the NBA, and that you think almost more than 50% of teams make it in those leagues. But in baseball, you're talking about less than 30%. or I don't know. I'm far from a mathematician, but 10 teams, right? So I think it's great. I mean, I love how that operates in baseball, because it's not a pity party for teams like the Montreal Canadiens, who didn't deserve to make the playoffs last year in the NHL. And I know they went to the Cup final, which is great for them, but they had the 18th best record in the NHL, and they made it all the way to the Cup final. So I think it disincentivizes the regular season a little bit. And I guess in the case of Major League Baseball, it does the exact opposite. I love the importance of the regular season. I think it makes it so much more significant. You need to do it for 162. And if you want to make it all the way back to the World Series, do it for 25 games more.
It's a great point that you make, because when I look at it objectively from a person that's not a big baseball fan, I sit there and think, well, how do you know if they put 8 teams in each conference? How do you not know that a 7th or 8th seed might upset or might make a Cinderella run or might create more entertaining baseball or something? But then when you think about it like that, a pity party, I like that term, because you're right. Montreal Canadiens, as fantastic as it was for the people of Quebec to pat themselves on the back about getting to the Stanley Cup final, they clearly were outmatched. There was no way they were going to beat Tampa. I don't care what anyone says. They didn't deserve to be there because, like you said, they had the 18th best record in the NHL.
I didn't say they didn't deserve to be there. They did deserve to be there. They beat the Leafs. They beat Winnipeg. They beat Vegas. They deserve to be there. But the whole question about whether or not the league as a whole should be allowing so many teams into the playoffs is a bigger question. I mean, it's all about revenues, right? I mean, as well, right? You think about, all the gates and all the jerseys that are sold over the course of a playoff run. Montreal did nothing wrong. They were just fortunate to play in a league where a lot more teams made the playoffs than in Major League Baseball. I'm not taking anything away from their run. It was unbelievable to watch, and the way they went about it and the way that they operated throughout the course of the playoff run was truly special. I don't know if it'll ever be replicated, but at the same time, they're fortunate that a lot of things went their way over the course of that playoff run. But that's how it works in all sports, man. You just got to roll with the punches, and however it falls, maybe it helped. Maybe you're helped by it. Maybe you're hurt by it. But in Montreal's case, I mean, definitely a lot of things went their way.
Especially with playing with the adjusted divisions that were all Canadian teams, and then making it, and then stumbling upon the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round, which is free real estate for any team that's an underdog, as we've learned in the last 10, 15 years. And then, beating Winnipeg, beating Vegas, they did it fair and square. No one cheated. But looking at it after the fact, it almost seems like when you look at the potential finals matchups and Montreal playing there, there's no halfway. It's either Montreal's in there and they get smoked, or they don't make it and another team goes in. I think there's obviously a lot of teams that probably could have put up a better fight against Tampa. Not to say that they would have won, but on the other hand, you're right. That's what happens when you play in a playoffs where it's expanded more. NFL expanding their playoffs in the last season, adding the 7th team in each conference. But again, I don't like it as much, because I'm not sure that the qualitative difference between the teams that weren't making it before and now being granted that extra spot is going to be the difference between winning the Super Bowl and missing the postseason. Maybe it adds more revenue for the league overall, or maybe a more entertaining matchup or two. But at the end of the day, it's hard to see those New York Giants 6-seeded wild card run to the Super Bowl. The Ravens, it's usually because they were 1 or 2 games back from winning the division, or just a movie moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about revenues. The NFL expanded to a 17-game season. The NFL expanded the playoffs, and not only with regards to tickets and all the stuff at stadiums. I mean, that's an extra game on TV, and we know how significant the NFL's television deal is. Worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. Each game, especially a playoff game, which we know gets huge ratings, is worth significant money. So I would expect leagues to continue to trend in this direction. The more teams in the playoffs, not only more money come playoff time, but teams look at their situation. And I think fans of teams look at the situation of their team and see, my team's still in the playoff chase. We can make the playoffs. Let's keep watching. Let's keep attending these games. Let's keep buying the merch, because we got to support our guys, because it's not over yet. So that whole idea, I think, lends itself to a trend in pro sports, which is, it's watering down the product, but it's also about the bottom line. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters.
which now makes sense why the CFL has their playoff format, because literally until week 18 or 19, everyone is still in playoff contention, even if they're 4 or 5 games back.
Not the Ottawa Red Blacks. I mean,
not the Ottawa Red Blacks, but I remember in 2012, Winnipeg was playing Hamilton, and I think they still only had 5 wins, and there was a chance that they could have made the playoffs if they ran the table. And I remember thinking, I was like, there's no way they're going to make it. Like, they suck. But mathematically, they were still alive. So it does make sense in a league where they desperately need that injection of revenue. And I'm sure as someone who covers a CFL team that people don't seem to know exists in the most populous city in Canada, they need all the help financially that they can get. So moving over now to the Toronto Argonauts, how much have your expectations been exceeded, met, or not met based on the free agent signings they made and all the social media buzz they had with pinball basically playing with the salary cap off?
Well, I'm not sure necessarily it's been anything the Argos have done that would make my expectations change for this club. I think you have to look at the Hamilton Ticats, who I thought were going to have an outstanding season. They've been brutal. Now, Dane Evans is out 4 to 6 weeks. Jeremiah Masoli, he's injured. No one's really sure if or when he's going to start a game again. So you might see David Watford under center for Hamilton against Calgary this week. And I mean, Hamilton's win total over under this year in Vegas was 9.5 wins. They have virtually no chance to hit that unless they run the table, which definitely won't happen. They've had a lot of injuries, Hamilton. You're talking about Braylon Addison and Devere Posey, amongst other guys on the defense who missed a lot of time. But I would argue that the trajectory of the Argos has changed simply because of the uncertainty and simply mediocre play of the Ticats. I think you can make a pretty quality argument after being at the game last week where the Argos beat Hamilton after the Ticats kicker missed that extra point, that the Argos are the best team in the East. I don't think that's some outlandish statement. We know Ottawa's trash. Montreal hit and miss with Vernon Adams Jr. You never know what you're going to get from him. But Nick Arbuckle, I think if anything, he's steady, solid, and as good a bet week to week as any quarterback in the East. Not to mention their D-line is stacked. We know how great the linebacker group is. Some questions in the secondary, but the Argos look really, really solid. I don't know if they're Grey Cup solid, considering what we've seen from the Bombers this year, but wouldn't shock me at all to see them represent the East.
I was going to say, thinking about that this morning at work, I was like, you know what? The Argos will probably make the Grey Cup, because unless Montreal can make the playoffs, I think that they're probably set to do that. But if anything, I feel like, and this may seem a bit outlandish, but if Calgary crosses over and they get hot, I could see even Calgary like getting to the Grey Cup over the Argos if they. Now, mind you, I don't think a crossover team has ever made the Grey Cup from the West to the East. But having said that, with the way they played against Edmonton, not that they were so amazing and all of a sudden Bo Levi Mitchell makes them, 10-win favorites or anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if they made some noise as a crossover team now that he's back. If they had to ride the hand of Jake Meyer the rest of the way, he's done very well, but the bottom line is that they weren't winning, unfortunately. And I feel bad for him because he put up amazing stats and looked as steady as any quarterback in the West, considering that no one knew who he was and everyone was calling for his head before he even stepped on the field. And everyone was like, Michael O'Connor, how could you do this to him? And blah, blah, blah. And then Jake Mayer comes in and throws 300 yards. Oh, everyone's silent and whatever. Like, where do you think a crossover team could fit into the shuffle if the Argos have to face a team not from the East in the Eastern Final?
Yeah, it would not surprise me at all if come playoff time, Calgary is a legit Grey Cup contender, whether they're the crossover team going from West to East, or they're the 3 seed maybe in the West. It might be difficult for them to get there considering their slow start, but we know what Bo does. Bo was not great last week, but good enough to get it done. They've had a lot of injuries on their defense, a lot of injuries on their offensive line. If that team is humming and that team is healthy, we know they will be there towards the end. They've simply had too much success. Dave Dickinson, John Huffnagel, you have to believe in their track records. If I'm the Argos, the last team I want to see crossover, well, I mean, Winnipeg would be the last team I would want to see crossover, but Calgary would probably be number 2. They're a very dangerous team, and I think they're a real sleeper heading into the second half of the CFL season, because this team's got a lot of talent. They have perhaps the best quarterback in the league. I don't really know where how I would rank the quarterbacks at this point in time, considering all the injuries and just everything that's gone on so far in the CFL season, coming off the year off and I guess the year and a half off. So we'll see how it all plays out. But I could see Bo getting hot. He's got a really good group of receivers too. Kamar Jordan, Josh Huff, leading the league in yards, and Herji Mayala. Like there's a lot of talent on that offense. They just got to get healthy and stick together.
Who would you take right now if they play each other in the playoffs? Would you take BC or Edmonton? Because BC has been good, but then there's other games where they're so-so. And then there's games where Edmonton looks bad, but then there's other games where Trevor Harris looks surgical. So how do those two teams look right now? Or where do you put them towards the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's close. I do think it's close. And I mean, I'd really like what I saw from BC last week. I mean, I think you and I could go probably suit up against Ottawa and put up some big numbers. That's not really saying much, but I've been really impressed with Michael Riley, when he's been on the field and healthy and producing. His group of receivers, from Lucky Whitehead to Brian Burnham. I mean, he's got a stacked group in his own right. And that defensive secondary has really performed well. I think they have a quality defense. But at the end of the day, with all things being equal, I think Winnipeg and Saskatchewan are the classes of the West. And I think BC and Edmonton are just a touch behind. Probably a coin flip between those two teams. I don't really like what I've seen from Edmonton. Heading into the season, I was huge on the Elks. Have not been impressed with what I've seen from Jamie Elizondo with that offense. They have far too much talent, from Harris to Wilder to Ellingson to Darrell Walker, to go two games, one against Ottawa, one against Calgary. The worst team in the East, the worst team in the West, at least by record. They didn't score a touchdown in two of those games. That concerns me. I have not been a big fan of the execution on offense from Edmonton, and they need to figure that out quickly. Unfortunately, they've got 3 games in 7 days coming up in the month of November. That'll be a challenge to get through those 3 games.
It's definitely going to be really tough. Mind you, you're looking at the schedule now for Saskatchewan, reading the newspaper and following what their media team talks about. They're saying, oh my goodness, like what is going on? The receivers haven't done anything, or it almost seems like people in Saskatchewan are going to press the panic button. But I was like, well, they also have the weakest strengths of schedule to end the year. So would that not be something that could play to their advantage come November?
Oh, I think that'll definitely play to their advantage. Also, they'll be getting Shaq Evans back. So you pair Shaq Evans with Kyran Moore, and we saw the success that this team had last year. I mean, we remember, in 2019, Cody Fajardo off the goalpost in an attempt to Kyran Moore to win the game in the West Final against the Bombers. So I think all things being equal with regards to the Riders getting healthy, and I think you look at the current constitution of the Blue Bombers, they're pretty healthy right now. They've dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the course of the season. We know Andrew Harris missed time. We know Nick Dembski missed times. A lot of guys on their D, at least in their secondary, missed time. If Saskatchewan is operating at full health, and Ed Gainey and Lucius Purifoy and AC Leonard are back in the lineup, and Fajardo has his full complement of weapons, I think you're not going to find a better matchup in the Canadian Football League than Winnipeg and Saskatchewan come late November, because that's going to be the West Final. It'll be a rematch of 2019, because those two teams are the best in the West. And I really hope we see that again, because what we saw at the Banjo Bowl, I mean, I don't think that's really an accurate representation of what those two teams can give.
I feel like the Labor Day Classic was maybe a bit more accurate as to how that game could go, because they did have more of the pieces that they were missing from the following week. And with how being at the game, seeing how both teams were going at each other's quarterbacks, it definitely made for some chippy football down the stretch. And the game was really close until the kill shot to Dembski with 4 minutes left. But outside of that, it was a 1-score game the whole time. So I don't think Riders fans have any reason to slam the panic button. Mind you, the way that Fajardo performed was maybe not as good as people thought, or maybe not as good as Glenn Suter would describe on television, but definitely something that they shouldn't be as worried about. Whereas in the East now, we know Toronto will probably be in the East Final. If a team doesn't cross over, who would you put also in the East Final? Would you say Hamilton makes it on the back of Dave Watford, or you say Montreal can upset and make the East Final?
Yeah, I do think Hamilton will be there. I don't know if Toronto's a lock to make the East Final. I think they've got a very good shot. I think Hamilton, when they get fully healthy and Addison and Posey and Banks are operating on offense, whether it's Dane Evans or Jeremiah Masoli, come the latter half of the season, that team's nasty. That defense is nasty. That front seven is really, really good. So I wouldn't be betting against the Ticats. I would not write them off. But yeah, if David Watford's their quarterback, you can write them off because that team has no chance of succeeding. But if Jeremiah Masoli can get back to even 80% of what we saw in 2018 and 2019 when he was healthy, this team is lethal, and they're probably the best team in the East, but we need to see it before we can actually call it like that.
What are the odds that Calgary and Edmonton, or both of them, miss the playoffs this year? Because the chances are that with the West, BC not being the sisters of the poor anymore, and Edmonton kind of taking a step back, and Calgary looking on the rocks, of those three teams, who makes it, who doesn't?
I think I'm probably going to have the Elks on the outside looking in simply because their schedule with that COVID outbreak is so condensed in the second half of the season. And you talk about playing 3 football games in 7 days. I don't know how you possibly, not only one can prepare for that from a game plan perspective, but from a physical perspective, being able to prepare your body for that. Good luck. I mean, they are at a significant disadvantage in those games. I don't care if they're playing Ottawa. Well, if they're playing Ottawa, they'll still pick up the W's. But without a matchup against the Red Blacks, they're in some serious trouble. So I think I would have the Elks on the outside looking in. I was really impressed with what I saw from Calgary. Bo wasn't traditionally sharp. Bo, I think, he get a couple of penalties that indicate that delay of game penalties that would indicate that more so than anything. I like Calgary. I think they're a really good sleeper. And if you're looking for a long shot play to win the Grey Cup, Calgary could be the team to click.
I agree with that. Only because, not because I'm a Calgary fan, but only because I've seen what they can do. And even when Mayer was playing for Calgary against Winnipeg in Winnipeg, I know people are talking about the drops and all this stuff, but I got PTSD thinking back to 2016 when Winnipeg came back from 26-7 down or 29-7 down in Calgary. All of a sudden, Bogue has 17 seconds and needs to go 40 yards. Bang, bang. Paredes from 52, bang. So never, ever count Calgary out for any reason whatsoever until they either have the official letter E beside their name, as in they're not in the playoffs, they've been eliminated, or until they get knocked out of the playoffs, when or if they make it. So definitely an interesting shuffle in the West, I think, this year, because now that BC is good, or at least serviceable, it's not just an automatic, okay, Calgary, Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, and then Edmonton can cross over if they feel like doing so. Because the East, we know, has been messy. In Toronto, like you said, Arbuckle is steady. Maybe he's not of the cream of the crop yet, but I'm so confused as to the offseason transaction between Toronto and Ottawa. I know people say it makes sense from the standpoint of reuniting Paulopoulos with Matt Nichols, who were both together in Winnipeg, and then reuniting Ryan Dinwiddie and Nick Arbuckle, who were together in Calgary. It seems like Ottawa were the losers of that shuffle now. What has gone wrong in Ottawa? They made the Grey Cup in 2015, 2016, 2018, so 3 times in 4 years, and they were literally an expansion team the year before. And now they've fallen right back to where they were in 2014. What's happened?
Well, I think that first and foremost, with regards to the whole Arbuckle and Nichols situation, the Argos simply walked away from Matt Nichols. They had the opportunity to retain him last offseason, and they're like, you know what, we're not going to pay you this roster bonus. You go ahead and walk. And Paul LaPolice was comfortable with Nichols from their time together in Winnipeg, but keep in mind, Ottawa had signed Arbuckle in the season that was canceled in 2020. So they had their sights on Nick Arbuckle being their guy. And there was this old switcheroo in the offseason prior to this season, the actual season that occurred. Fortunately for the Argos, noodle-armed Matt Nichols is not their quarterback because, no disrespect to him, he's had a tremendous career in the Canadian Football League. It's pretty obvious he can't throw the ball the way he used to. And it's also obvious he does not have a defense backing him like he had in Winnipeg that he does here in Ottawa. And they are really struggling. I think they have 51 to BC last week, and it was not even remotely close. Ottawa is in some serious trouble, and they remind me a lot of the Houston Texans in the NFL. Yeah, Houston won their first game. I'm not sure Houston will win again this season. I think the same may very well apply to the Red Blacks.
Well, reading insider talk from John Hodge with 3 Down Nation, one of the quotes that I read from his article was saying that Dominique Davis's release is a bit slow because of that long arm, and also just him missing the timing, throwing picks. what's the situation? How can Ottawa fix their situation? Because it's really looking not good for them overall. They do have some good young players. I know Devontae Dedmon has done really well.
Yeah.
RJ Harris, Nate Bahar, but like outside of that, they don't look like a complete group. So
No.
what would you do if you were the Red Blacks GM?
Man, they are completely devoid of talent on both sides of the ball. Let's just be real here. I think Marcel Desjardins, the general manager of Ottawa, would agree with that. I mean, I don't see how you could possibly argue against that. Dominique Davis throws more interceptions than anyone in the Canadian football. He was 14 in 9 starts last year, had a bunch so far this year already. I mean, the dude is a turnover machine. That's a bad start. You got to find a quarterback. I think that is what sets the tone for your entire organization. But beyond that, I mean, their receiver group, lackluster. On the offensive line, I mean, I haven't seen much that would indicate there's a lot going that way. And I mean, there's some pieces on defense there, but they really need to up the talent quotient on that roster. And I know they signed Kenny Stafford. I don't know what type of impact he can have at this point in his career. There's a lot of work to be done, and it wouldn't shock me at all if there's a regime change at the top with Ottawa at some point soon.
It's definitely been unfortunate for Ottawa football fans, as they're the team that's folded more than anyone else in the CFL. And considering they were flying so high to heights never foreseen by any Ottawa fan before, the nation's capital, the football team, the nation's capital collapsed what seemed like almost overnight with an abysmal year in 2019. They started 2-1, and I think they lost their next 15 games or something like that, or they lost 13 or something. It was insane. Like the fact that they fell off so hard, and I just feel so bad because they have such a passionate fan base. But like it's like Winnipeg. Like when Winnipeg was bad during the Joe Mack era, it's like these fans literally have nothing else to cheer for, maybe except the Jets, but the Jets are still meh then. And them and Saskatchewan are amongst the most loyal in the CFL. So to see them fall off, like if the Argos are bad, people don't even know. If the Argos are good, people don't even know, like, which sucks.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, and you're right. You can have bad teams in a league, but you don't want a team as bad as Ottawa is. They are terrible. They are painful to watch, unless you're betting against them, in which case they are delightful to watch. And yeah, it's tough to watch that team. It's very little redeeming qualities, very few redeeming qualities that you would even look for. Like what do you have to be optimistic if you're a Red Blacks fan right now? I mean, it's Timothy Flanders. Like I don't know, like it sucks.
Terrence
It's
Williams.
tough to watch, but as a guy who has been to every Argos game for the last 3 years, 2018, 2019, there were some very, very dark days watching James Franklin quarterback. The Argos you wanted to claw your eyes out at times. He was so terrible. McLeod Bethel-Thompson was really good statistically. He just had a defense that was pathetic. In 2019, they couldn't stop anybody, whether it was on the ground or through the air. So you hope for Ottawa's sake they find a quarterback. Maybe Jeremiah Masoli makes his way there. I know there have been rumors that could possibly happen, considering Hamilton. I mean, not anymore with Dane Evans being hurt, but they've got some good depth at quarterback. And maybe Jake Mayer. I mean, could he be a fit there in Ottawa if Calgary decides to move from him, considering what we saw in those 2 starts? I mean, it seems like a stretch, but Nick Arbuckle was Bo's backup, and we see he's become a quality option. Maybe Jake Mayer can be the same.
For sure, Calgary with their quarterback factory, all they need to do is just show a little sample size, boost trade value, and then dangle the bait for the struggling team at the bottom of the basement who desperately needs someone as a solid signal caller. And I think that Ottawa might be in the market for one of those two, maybe not by the end of this season, but next season. So now I want you to put your money where your mouth is. If you are betting today on who is going to play in the Grey Cup, or which 2 teams will appear, who'd you bet on and why?
Honestly, and maybe this is chalk, I'm still betting on a 2019 Grey Cup rematch between Hamilton and Winnipeg. I think Hamilton, over the course of the season, they might not have the best regular season, but they'll get in. And you don't want to face a fully healthy Hamilton team that is operating with Banks and Braylon Addison, 2 of the top 5 receivers in the Canadian Football League. And then you talk about that defensive front is nasty. Dylan Wynn and Jagarrett Davis and like all those guys are rocking and rolling. Ted Laurent. I don't want any part of Hamilton. We know Simone Lawrence was just absolutely outstanding in 2019. He's had a little bit of a slow start this year. That's the team I'd be looking out for in the East, as painful as it is for me to go against my Argos. And Winnipeg, I mean, I don't really need to elaborate on Winnipeg. That team is nasty. from top to bottom, Caleros on down. They are complete, and they are just simply the class of the CFL at this point. So you have to pick Winnipeg in the West. In the East, I mean, you could flip a coin between Hamilton, Toronto, and maybe even Montreal or the crossover team. But I think you have to go with Hamilton based on when fully healthy, they are the best roster in the East.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Winnipeg Hamilton 2019. We're going to have Groundhog Day all over again in 2021. Book it, get to bowdog.ca, and make sure to place your bets and follow Aaron on Twitter because he has the best betting advice. And there's nothing else that you could go wrong with if you're always looking for the over-under and who the sleepers are to take on a nightly basis. Am I right?
I think that's a fair assessment. Aaron_Korolnek. I probably should make it more easy for people to relay than just my full name with an underscore in the middle, but oh well, that's what it is.
So I must ask you, as we get towards the end of our time here, what's your favorite sport to bet on and why?
Oh, it's definitely the CFL. It's absolutely the CFL. I mean, there's 9 teams, which makes it easier to consume as much information as you need. I mean, I love betting on all football. I mean, the NFL and the CFL are my 2 favorite sports, and I don't even think it's close beyond that. I do cover Toronto sports here, so you know the Leafs and the Raps. I'm a big sports guy. It's pretty obvious. I love betting on football. The way that the sport is designed and the conversation surrounding it, it's just perfect. And hopefully the Canadian Football League, I know they have a betting partner in BetRegal. They continue to embrace gambling because I've seen it firsthand with my group of friends. They love the CFL because they have money on the games and they're winning money on the game. So as long as that continues, the fan development will continue for the Canadian Football League.
Well, with that, Aaron, I want to thank you for having been on today's episode. It was a great pleasure talking CFL football with you, betting and getting into the nitty gritty of how the Blue Jays might shock the MLB going into the 2021 postseason.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me. And anytime you need some degenerate gambling advice, you know who to call.
Well, make sure you go check out Aaron on Twitter, at Aaron_Korolnek. Make sure you follow his gambling advice for all you degenerate gamblers who always bet the favorite. Make sure that you get your gambling advice straight before you start losing money, because once you start losing and you're in the hole, it gets really frustrating. So get out there, bet on the CFL. We need bettors. We need money generating into this league. Thank you for listening to today's episode with radio host of TSN or on TSN 1050 in Toronto, Aaron Korolnek.